Thank you, Councillor Rhodes. Anyone else? Councillor Javed.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, just to kind of emphasize on this procedure being brilliant and some of the things that you spoke about, like procurement pipeline, that indicates that, you know, we're seeing things from a different lens and we're preparing ourselves to ensure that we don't land on the situations that we, you know, observed on the last council meeting and those comments. However, and then let's say the value for contract standing order definitely reflects perfectly on the report and in terms of greater understanding. And I think the way we are seeing these points coming forward, it gives us a little bit of reassurance of how nicely we're getting deep down into the roots of, you know, how the business was conducted earlier and how we can make it better. And while, of course, I align completely, I also align with Councillor Rhodes' comments where he said that, you know, we would like to see or review more than the policies and procedures and, you know, happy-looking document that are perfect in every KPI, whereas, you know, in some case scenarios, I had questions like how come we're getting that 100 that we're representing here or 80 that we're representing here. But I feel that if we can build on, let's say going forward, build a practice for ONS, especially the resource and finance, that, you know, we can have a early insight and perhaps one or two caseworks in a way that upcoming contract, how they are navigated using the current system, to add confidence, from the member side. Secondly, how I see, let's say, this whole drill is reflecting on two sides of reputation for our council. One is, of course, with the resident and how we're delivering them. And the other one that we initially talked about is how we are seen by the central government, and that reputation and position then end of the day it does also matter in terms of how we tackle our financial issues going forward. But I also feel that there is a disbalance, or I won't say misrepresentation, but somehow an idealistic representation on the paper. Then if I were to go down and, you know, go into any of those areas that are subject to these procedures, and if I dissect one case scenario, the real facts do not match the claims that we make as a policy or a standard. So how about we redo using this committee some demonstration. Let's say we talked about improvement and recovery plan and asset rationalization. Again, we are all, you know, understanding this better and we're all working together. But even in terms of contracts, that practice where we have an insight before the decisions are recommended to executive or recommended to the council, so everybody has a chance to kind of scrutinize it on a deeper level than being surprised or, you know, take it towards the end. So just those comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Javed. Alistair would like to respond to your specific points made there.
Thank you, Councillor Javed. I wonder if you could clarify the point about the which elements of the report in particular do you not think reflect what's potentially happening in reality? I just wondered if you're able to provide some clarity about which particular sections you're referring to.
So on the meeting today, on the agenda, different reports that we saw, especially around KPIs, where, again, this is resource and finance, housing is different, audit is different, so we don't expect to kind of scrutinize everything here. But, you know, getting the feedback from the residents and applying it to the committee matrix and the KPIs that I saw here, they do not match with the real fact. So let's say there was a place in the previous agenda point where we've reflected a KPI stating 100% on responding for, let's say, a planning application which is minor in nature and major in nature within a certain period of time, and we've striked 100%. Whereas I personally know some cases that do not match, similar with the housing, you know, some other things. So what I'm trying to say, and again, I don't want to connect back to the discussion that we've wrapped up, because again, we can, you know, see it in the upcoming quarter and have a, you know, back end perhaps for the members to know and then bring it forward. But then just for us to take a note that in terms of strategy and document, everything looks wonderful, but then we don't see the reflection of these things in terms of efficiency. So let's say from the corporate or the resource side, there will be much expectation of how we are tackling the upcoming or sitting mid-sized businesses or big-sized businesses, how our service level is, how our interrelation is, how it reflects back on, kind of certain things in KPI. But that's a larger scale. That's what I'm saying. If we can bring some case scenario and demonstrate the application of these things in totality, either on the back end or the front end, just to establish a mutual confidence so we can all speak the same language and we all believe in that process, and we can add to that confidence in the eyes of public. That was the point.
Thank you, Councillor. What I would say is, I guess for the performance management report, which is put together by officers, that's based on the information which officers hold. And I think if there are instances where you hold information which potentially doesn't align with what you see, what would probably be helpful is if you're able to share that. Maybe it's outside of the meeting, or because I think that the report's based on information which is held, but if you do hold alternative information which you think potentially doesn't align with what is in the report, it's probably better to share that with it, so that can then obviously be compared against what is held by officers.
Sure. I think I'm just giving it a benefit of doubt for now, because how the information has been recorded and evaluated, our means could be different than the means that were used here. So, but then, of course, going forward, yes, I'll keep that in mind and we can work on that. Thank you.
Councillor Gervais, could I just ask if you think there's a specific action coming out of that in terms of you providing examples of what you're talking about here?
As a recommendation, I'm just suggesting that, let's say we're reviewing the procedure we will follow going forward for the contracts. If we can use an example for any upcoming contract and how we are using these systems or policies that we spoke about, and kind of demonstrate that using a live scenario, upcoming live scenario, previous live scenario, how we use these tools to ensure that the contract had gone through these procedures.
We'd have to take that away in terms of how you could do that in a way that doesn't compromise the procurement process, which is part of the discussion we had at the council, wasn't it, the other day, recognising that taking on board members' feedback in terms of that overall process. All I would say is that there are controls in place in the council, which means that any procurement activity has authorisation levels, all procurement activity. There is no purchase order that can be issued above £500 that does not go through an independent financial control panel for authorisation. All procurement activity and contract activity is supported by the contracts team, by Pino's team, which is independent of the business and is there as they hold the procurement standards and they make sure the process fits with the procurement standards in that respect. So I think we have quite a well-developed approach, and we can think about how you can test and kick that around. But we would need to think about how you could do that in a way that doesn't compromise a procurement process. I would say that, obviously scrutiny, we're trying to continue to develop scrutiny. It's mature it in terms of an approach. We need to recognise that through Emily, what's happened this year is we've given Centre for Governance and Scrutiny training to members. We've developed a template approach, so if there's any scrutiny items you're considering, then it runs through a process where we say, well, what's the item? What would you like to get from the item? How does that mean we need to set the item up for scrutiny? So all of that is much more structured now to help members engage with what scrutiny's role is on key areas. We run a forward plan process for each of the scrutinies. So for this scrutiny, we had a planning session where we said, what are the items you want to scrutinise? And we offered items in that programme to make sure that you'd got a good reflection of the whole of the Corporate Resources Directorate. So we've We put things on that scrutiny because we felt that actually there are some areas where the natural attention had not turned to. So we said, I think customer services we put on there and said, well, we've not covered that, let's put customer services on there. And we do share the forward plan every time at each of the scrutinies. So if there is a key decision that is coming up to an executive, you have an ability to say, actually, could that, if it's in my area, could that come through scrutiny before, or take a decision about whether actually it's better to do post-decision scrutiny and look at the decisions that the executive have taken. So I think there's still more work to do, but I think we're all working towards making scrutiny a really important part of decision making and supporting the executive in its decisions, but also holding us to account. It won't be perfect, but we're certainly open to improving that process and continue to work. That's what I think there's value in scrutiny on key areas of business as well, because there's always different perspectives, and you can often take those into account, and things are raised that we've just not even thought about. So I think it's about creating that positive relationship.
Just quickly wrap this. So again, like I actually appreciated the fact that we have all this laid out and presented to us. However, the reason that I suggested to have a little sneak peek into the process using a case scenario, and maybe not on a lengthy point where it comes as an agenda point, maybe something that can come as a complementary or complementing report or brief, where we can go into part B, but then we have an insight of how you will describe, for example, the application of procurement pipeline into any upcoming contract, and how you're going to use corporate contract register. And, so the relevance, the importance, more than this, the theory, we will see it in practical, and that will give us I think, the measuring tool going forward, so we can imagine better, we can analyze better, we can, kind of understand better. So that is why I was suggesting just to have an insight to that. I'll leave it to that point for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Joe, one thing that's come to mind is, in light of what you're saying, I mean, one of the things which is in the report, which is set out, is obviously the introduction of the contract standing orders, which will make some changes, provide clarity over responsibilities, thresholds, etc. And I wonder, in line with what you're asking about, whether it may be an idea in potentially 6 months or so, or a sufficient period of time to feed back on the operation of that, because I think it might touch on some of the points that you've raised in terms of kind of seeing what's happening in practice, but it probably needs some time to kind of work its way through to feed back to scrutiny on how it's working, etc. I wonder whether that might be a way of addressing possibly one of your what you're seeking to find out, because that's a new process which has been introduced. It's in theory going to be approved by Council in September, and actually seeing how that operates, and for scrutiny to have a view as to what's happening in a number of months once that's taken effect.
So absolutely, I understand and align that it can take time for us to look at, but I'm coming from a perspective where we like more transparency and understanding. When we see these, let's say, reports and presentation, we understand the steps that you're going to take, but we fail to sometimes envision how these are applied in the actual practice. So all I'm suggesting, to have more confidence, to add more confidence to this committee, so we can then make informed recommendation, go deeper into the process, make sure that we've seen all that we're trying to see, using case scenario instead of just generic standardized report. So even if it takes a while we move along, if we can be integrated, that's all I will be appreciated. Thank you.
Can I just... Sorry.
Yeah, and just we can bring forward to discuss with Chair and Deputy Chair a potential case scenarios around the contract register, so bring the contract register in and explain how the contract register process works, and there may be a potential to have a look at a specific contract within that process. So very happy to work with the Chair and Deputy Chair and Emily to see whether we can scope that out and bring something forward that brings to life. So you see the contracts, the contract register, the values of contracts, the timescales that they're operating over, and the level of control that that contract register applies to the process. But so we can see if we can scope something out on that particular issue.
Can I just note myself that there are clearly commercial and legal sensitivities around scrutinising specific procurement activities, particularly where the contract has not been awarded. And I refer back to the discussion we had in the meeting, in the full council meeting last week, with regards to the leisure services contract. And the one councillor made statements seemed to imply that other councillors were asking to be able to scrutinise individual tenders for something like that contract. And I don't think any of us were asking for that at all. I think what certainly somebody like myself would be interested in is looking at invitation to tender documentation or equivalent, and seeing that all the points that we'd raised were covered in there. So I just wanted to make sure that was understood. There are those sensitivities. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Morley.
Yeah, sorry.